Hello everyone, here we're starting off with Boston, KBOS, and this is Mr. X's scenery hat on, and I am in the IXEG 737 in the cockpit view here, and I'll start off by showing the settings here that I will use throughout these videos. This is Beta 11. Here are our settings. I have cockpit shadows turned off, generally because I do VR, and when I do VR you gain back about 7 frames per second by disabling those using a LUA script entry. Let's go outside, take a different perspective. Now at this point I'm running Beta 11 with the default cloud set. There's a few out there you can try. You got the Clouds HD textures you can install, or Gold Clouds, Clouds Gold 1.4. I typically run with Gold Clouds 1.4, but as I've said right now, this is just basic default textures. Okay, so what I've done now is I've enabled the LUA script that I have tweaked. So let's reload the LUA, and there you can see the clouds have changed. So there we have the tweaked clouds. Taking a look at the tweak default textured clouds. Gonna raise him up. Here we are at 3,000 feet. And now we're at about 5. Let's go up to cruising like 35,000 feet, 34,000 feet. Take a pan around here. Alright, now we have the Clouds Gold textures installed. Sure. Climbing into the clouds. As you can see, it's a little bit washed out. I had trouble with my tweaks trying to find a balance between washed out and gray on top and bottom, and this was pretty much the balance I ended up with. Here climbing to 16,000 feet, and now we're back at 34,000 right here. Okay, we're back, and now I have Clouds HD version 2. Take this and spin them around. Also, now we are at 12. And all the way back to 34. You might notice down there below the cloud deck, dividing line between the scenery, I actually have ortho for XP level 17, I believe, Bing. But as you get close to the edge, I did not download the textures right at the airport just yet. You can see the Clouds HD, the puffs just don't look quite right to me. They're superimposed upon each other and they just don't look that great. That's kind of why I've settled for the gold. Next up, we'll take a look at SMP. Alright, welcome back. Here we are. Right away you might notice a difference in the frame rate. Frame rate has dropped to around 30. It was up around 33, give or take, with the defaults, which usually Skymax Pro or xEnviro should make it better. But in this case it's not, but it's probably because of my settings. I have Skymax set to pretty high levels. Now Skymax Pro uses mostly cumulus and cirrus clouds to represent stratus and various levels of clouds in the atmosphere. There are basically 3 types of clouds, 3 main groups of clouds. You have your cumulus, you have your stratus, and you have your cirrus. Cumulus being lower level, stratus being mid, cirrus being high. Now usually with X-Plane it's limited to 3 layers of clouds. Now since version 3 of SMP, they've been able to do more than 3 layers of clouds, which helps with the realism, but they still seem to rely mostly on cumulus for generating their weather. It still looks a lot better than the default, and close to Active Sky Next, which I'll actually show a clip of Active Sky Next in this video just to show you the difference or similarities between these. Now, Skymax Pro, it cost, I believe it was around $40, and it has an add-on called the Real Weather Connector, RWC, for another $20, and I have both of those. That utilizes data from NOAA and other sources to make the clouds look more realistic as you go up into them and over the distance too. I have NOAA running as well here. The NOAA plugin can be used in conjunction with Skymax Pro. It helps to make it even more realistic. There's no harm in running both. Now one of the keys here, if we take a look in the menu, is how you configure it. And we go to, first of all, real world weather. If you have the connector installed, you should always have it on always, ignore X-Plane settings, and never change visible weather. The never change visible weather is supposed to make moving through the clouds less of a frame rate hit, so it doesn't try to change weather as you're going in and out of clouds. At least that was my understanding. The always ignore will make it so that you can't change or customize the weather. It'll always pull down the real weather. You change to the top one and you can change the weather like you can with default weather, and it will use their textures to represent the weather from Skymax Pro. You can't do that with xEnviro. There's no way to use customized weather at this time. We can take a look at the actual settings, and this is the settings I'm using right now. I have the cloud area covered 3/4 of the way up there. I'm using crisp. I found that to be the best, and I'm using cloud set number 5 on high. I did not find a difference in frame rate between any of these for my system. It may differ on lower end systems, but for high, medium, and low, made no difference with my system. And the same thing with, I have cloud shadows at 0.62 because in VR, if I had that much higher, it made the cockpit, or not the cockpit, it made the outside world look really dark when it was cloudy. And that was about right at 0.62 to still give you shadows on the ground. Now one thing you'll notice is rotating clouds with track IR in particular, or VR. It's a bit of an annoyance. I haven't found a way to get rid of it just yet, but it may be related to the puff rotation. I'm not positive yet. And disabling that might disable the rotating clouds issue, which has always been an issue with Active Sky and P3D in the past as well. But let's just, you can see the cumulus representation there, solid cloud deck here. Here we are at 7,600 feet, 8,000 feet, and get a little higher, 13,000. Now the one thing you'll notice is that Skymax Pro just likes to represent stratus by lumping all the cumulus in an endless, repetitive, sort of bumpy pattern. Better than the defaults though. 34,000 with Skymax Pro, you can see a definitive border where the clouds end. This is at the 3/4 mark on the slider. And I'll show you the difference. Let's go down to 1/4 of the way. Your frame rate will jump. I was at 34, now I'm at 40. That's about a 6 frame per second jump, as you can see there. And your border becomes very noticeable there. And let's crank it all the way up. Frame rate dropped all the way back down to 30. Still drawing them in. But you get a closer depiction to the defaults horizon to horizon of clouds, although there's still a border in this image for some reason. I've had it in the past where you couldn't see the edge at maximum. I think it's still loading the clouds here. Now Skymax Pro has stated that they are working on a patch to make things blend on the horizon better. So hopefully in the next patch this will be improved and you won't have to crank your slider up as high if you want it to look most realistic. And I bring it down right about there is where it was. Got 5 frames per second. So in my system you lose about 5 frames per second for every quarter you jump this slider, basically, or third roughly maybe. Let me just switch it to soft. There you have soft, and now fast. Actually fast isn't bad either, but here's crisp again. Now we can take a look at the Stratus overcast representation. I'm going to hit apply on solid stratiform, and you really don't see a difference, not with this view anyway, or with this current weather situation. But let's drop down and put it back to HD cloud puffs. Really depends on the actual weather that you're loading on the Stratus overcast representation. If you take a look here at the METAR report, this was taken about 35 minutes ago. We have an overcast at 1,000 feet. As you can see here, it is currently on solid stratiform. But that is the difference between HD and solid stratiform. Here we have a bunch of little puffs put together. We can go back down, close enough to where we were. And there's those cumulus clouds again. Well, let's just go ahead and fly up into this cloud deck here for real. Looking good, 100 knots. Alright, rotating. You can see the clouds are rather awesome looking here. Skirting the tops of the clouds. Certainly feels much more realistic than with the default clouds. Volumetric, 3D in nature. You can see the cloud shadows down on the water. Looking really good. That is about it. I have found, by the way, that SMP seems to get better frame rate when you're doing virtual reality flying and the Oculus Rift and fly inside, which I do 90% of the time. Alright, here we are with XP11 Beta 11 again, and this time with xEnviro running. It's an environmental engine. It does the sky, raindrops, sound of the raindrops on the windshield, that sort of thing. it runs about $69.99, and they've only been around for a little while as opposed to Skymax Pro, which has been around for years. xEnviro, right off the bat, you can see the frame rate in the bottom right again. About the same, not quite as good as the defaults by themselves. xEnviro does support shadows on the ground. I have everything set to, in this case, real mode on the left here. Under the weather settings. Under the cloud settings, I have them set to optimal, but I've lowered the cloud brightness down to about 80% because I found 100 to be too bright. These settings can help you gain a little bit of frame rate if you take down the minimum visible range and the detailed range a little bit more, but I haven't bothered with that. Upper and lower atmosphere turned on. You get your 3D clouds passing effect, but it's worth noting that there aren't really 3D clouds or volumetric clouds with xEnviro. In fact, if you're flying past a cloud, you may notice it looks like a piece of paper floating sideways. Particularly in VR, it's a little strange to see. Post-processing I have unchecked. Turn it on, it gets super bright in the cockpit and the world, and it doesn't look right. So leaving that off seems to be the best bet there. Light scattering doesn't have much of an effect. Now there you can see their version of the cloud deck. Now previously, before we manually overrode things with SMP, you had more of a solid overcast and cumulus cloud coverage. This is a little less defined and seems to be higher, at least from the way it looks here. But it may look a little more realistic in terms of the textures, because it's throwing more of a mix of clouds in here. And here we go. Right there, it's about 1,000 feet, and the cloud deck is virtually paper thin. Get up a little higher here, we're at 5,000. Here we're at 10. You can see it tries to do more of a variety on the distant rendering. Let's go to the 34,000 again, like we have done before. It shows clouds further off in the distance with more of a variety, so it looks a little more realistic from high altitude, maybe less realistic from low altitude depending on what you're looking for. And that's why I tend to fly with SMP for general aviation flights, and if I'm going to try these big jets, I would probably use xEnviro. One thing of note, if you're doing VR xEnviro, you need to have 1.04 running, because if you don't, VR doesn't look quite right. There's a fog issue and a haze that kind of follows your eyes as you move. Alright, here we go. Here we are climbing through the cloud deck. And that's xEnviro. Okay, here we are in Active Sky next to Prepare 3D version 3.4. This is Hotfix 2, recently released. You can see the view, that it is representative. It does a really nice job of representing the overcast without having to change anything, thanks to Active Sky Cloud Art Automatic setting and the Global Automatic. And that is what you're used to seeing if you're a Prepare 3D user by default and you're using this product, or even Rex. Rex does a pretty good job, but the forthcoming Rex Skyforce might do an even better job from the looks of it, and they are talking about possibly coming back over to X-Plane in the near future. Hopefully that will happen. The more competition the better in terms of this cloud textures and so forth. Change the view again. Alright, here we are outside above the cloud deck at about 9,000 feet. Hit that deck, and we are at 3, 4, so it was a much thinner deck than the SMP deck. There's a bit of rotation with clouds there too. You can see it rotated. There we go. You can see the horizon to horizon. Slightly better than SMP, but it is still a little bit of a box-in effect with active sky next, but that's usually not the case unless it's the METAR data here showing gaps, which can always be the case as well, especially near the shoreline like in Boston. And it does have a bit of variety up above, sort of like xEnviro does, but here they're actually depicting the stratus level much more realistic than xEnviro was doing. And there you have it. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.